All right, there we go. We'll get started in just a few more seconds. Wait for people to trickle in. Boom and boom. All right. Welcome everyone to today's US version of Kubernetes Office Hours, where we answer your user questions live on the air with our esteemed panel of experts. You can find us in hashtag Office Hours on Slack and check the topic in that channel for the URL to event information. Before we begin, let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is Jeffrey Sika. I'm the host this month. And panelists, if you please, starting with Ralph.
Hi, my name is Ralph Bankson. I'm a customer reliability engineer at Heptio.
Liability engineer?
Reliability engineer.
Mario, you're next.
Hey everyone, I am Mario Loria. I am a senior DevOps engineer at StockX, doing Kubernetes on AWS and Google Cloud.
Awesome. Solly, since you just joined, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Solly Ross. I'm a software engineer on the OpenShift and Kubernetes team at Red Hat. I focus on auto scaling, but also work on a variety of other things.
Last but not least, Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Killen with the University of Michigan. I'm Jeff's coworker. He and I essentially handle Kubernetes for a bunch of researchers and mostly on-prem and do a whole bunch of crazy stuff.
That's a nice way of putting it. Before we start, here are the ground rules. This is a judgment-free zone. Everyone had to start from somewhere, so please help out everybody by having supportive environment while in the channel. We will try to do our best to answer your questions, but the panel doesn't have access to your cluster, so live debugging is off topic, but we will do our best to try and get you moving down to that next step of debugging. Panelists, you are encouraged to expand on your answers with your experiences and pro tips. Audience, you can help out by pasting in URLs to official docs, blogs, or anything that might be relevant to the topic at hand within the chat. Post your questions to discuss.kubernetes.io or Stack Overflow, and we'll try and get to those as well. You can also help us out by tweeting and spreading the word and just paying it forward. Each session is recorded and available on YouTube. If you're using this as a work resource, please let us know how we're doing so we can make it better. That's something we always want to try and strive for, making it better. If you want to sit in on the panel and spread your knowledge, you are more than welcome, and you can earn a fabulous water bottle that I don't have because George is out of town. Help us take notes at a URL that I will paste into the channel. We are always looking for marketing help, so if you're awesome at social media, please help us out. And lastly, feel free to hang out and hashtag office hours afterwards. If the other channels are a little bit too busy for you and you're looking for a friendly home, you're more than welcome to pull up a chair, hang out, and ask questions. And with that, let's get started. Let me scroll out to the first question. Oh man, this is getting unwieldy here. That's the EU edition. I'm just heading over to your document, Bob.
Okay.
Yep, so we've started pulling questions from Discuss, Focal, and Stack Overflow. But if there's a question that hops into the chat, like Sean's, we're going to prioritize those first. Oh, Samir, actually, you were first in line as well. So, Samir asks, whenever a PV is created, so whenever a persistent volume is created the first time, the PVC gets bound to it with the correct storage class. If I delete the persistent volume claim and then recreate it then, it does not get bound to the previous PV as expected. Instead, it creates its own PV and volume for EBS. Is this expected behavior? My app expects the same PV to be mounted to access the data available in the volume. Has anybody else faced this issue? Panelists.
No, that is actually the expected behavior. Generally, you don't want to delete the PVC claim. You can delete the pod that's associated with it that's running your application. That's no big deal. But you don't want to delete the PVC. With storage classes, when you delete the PVC, depending on your reclamation policy, it might even auto just delete the PV that was bound to it. If you do happen to, if you need to mount a previously deleted or reclaimed PV, at least in EBS, you can go get the, what's it called? The volume ID and create a new PV not using the storage class and essentially create a new PVC pointing to that and then mount that to your pod.
I think the key word here in PVC is the C, the claim. So you can think of the claim as saying, I need this storage and I need this storage to be my storage. As soon as you delete the claim, what you're telling to Kubernetes is you're saying, I no longer need this storage. Do with it as you will, you know. And so when you release that claim, you have washed your hands of the storage, and Kubernetes is free to, when you add a new claim, allocate new storage for that, because you're saying the new claim, you're saying, I want new storage. I need some new piece of storage.
All right, I think that answers that. Sean asks, how do folks manage images and image layers to take advantage of caching image layers but avoid too much bloat?
So for images, there's a lot you can do here. I would say think about the foundation of your images and how they're being built from the ground up. Don't worry about image layers as much. Worry about why are we using Ubuntu as a base image? Why are we using Debian? Why are we using Arch Linux or whatever you're doing, right? A lot of people think that they need a full operating system for their applications. They really don't. And in terms of security and overall reliability of your systems, things will deploy faster and you have less of a kind of attack vector if you have less binaries in your images. So think about that first and foremost. In terms of caching, a lot of that is just automated and handled for you. So you really don't have to worry too much about trying to optimize that. By default, layers are taken care of. But the big thing here is when you do have a Docker file and you do have multiple statements in it, ensuring that, for instance, a run line has everything that you want to do, everything that you want to achieve in that run line. Don't do multiple run statements for multiple redundant functions. So each statement in a Docker file creates another layer, right, which creates more overhead. So those are some key things to think about. Maybe they're looking for something else. Someone can hopefully add to that as well.
I know some people squash down, basically at the end of the Docker build process, they have tooling that squashes down all of the layers on top of the base image down to a single layer. So you're basically left with base image and changes. I think we do that in some cases. And then, of course, there's also alternative build tools that just kind of do that by default. So a bunch of the different Docker build tools that are not Docker build do that. So Builda, I know off the top of my head because this is a Red Hat project, but Builda does that, or can do that, I believe. But I'm pretty sure some of the other ones can do it as well.
The other thing that we've actually seen borrowed sort of from how we handle things in the HPC world is if you have a lot of common stuff, you might wind up sort of creating like an NFS share with all that and then mounting that as a sort of shared volume amongst most of your pods. So that way your images themselves can be really small, but if you have this large collection of shared dependencies or applications, they can be shared through everything that way.
It just means that they they are managed out of scope of the container build.
Yep.
Okay, I think that answers that. If that didn't, please let us know. Evesy has 2 questions, if that's okay, and I think it is. The first one is, I've noticed pods occasionally getting stuck starting up due to them failing to mount a secret volume with something like below, and they posted a little block. Restarting the pod always fixes it. Any idea what causes this? So let's start with that one.
If I had to guess off the top of my head, whoa, we just got a giant
Big
text.
message.
If I had to guess off the top of my head, there's some sort of race going on between service account secret creation and pod start. Hypothetically, I thought the automatic retry mechanism should catch up with that eventually, and you shouldn't have to restart your pod. I'm curious, is this right after a new service account has been created, or is it like the service account has existed for a while and it's just intermittent failures? But in either case, I do remember seeing someone asking about this before on the bug tracker.
Okay, while we get more information, let's move on to Evesy's second question. Pretty new to CNIs, so Calico in this example. Are there any tips to help visualize network policies to help identify where and why stuff is being dropped, since as far as I can tell, you don't get any logs that give this info? Ralph went ahead and started linking some info from Calico, but I'd love to hear from anybody else, if possible. Or, Ralph, if you have any other
Yeah, I can
info
just.
on it.
So the stars policy demo is actually this. It's an app that shows lines going around showing the flow of traffic, so that you can do various things to network policies to see their effect between different ones in kind of a visualized way.
Awesome. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to add really quick.
Yeah.
Weave actually has a tool for this as well. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's in their suite of Weave Cloud options. It literally maps everything for you. You can click, get specific information on certain hosts where patterns are going, etc. So really, the plugin you're using is going to be your best. Usually they'll provide a service for doing this. However, be aware those can tax your network, especially on initial launch.
Definitely. By the way, Evesy came back and said the service account had been there for a while, but the deployment pod spec had just been updated. If that helps. Actually, that kind of doesn't help. That makes it worse in my mind.
Yeah, that makes the answer much less obvious. If the service account has existed for a while, and you're seeing that, I think that sounds like a bug. If you're able to reproduce it or to get any more detailed kubelet logs, like if you can run your kubelet at a higher log verbosity and see if there's anything useful in there, I'd recommend posting it to the Kubernetes GitHub issues and tag signode in it. And, worst comes to worst, someone will tell you, oh, yeah, we fixed that. But, it could be that there's a bug there that we haven't noticed before.
All right, now let's get to, this is kind of a large question. Has anyone read ahead on it yet? All right. Wait, have you, Bob?
I was working with him earlier on trying to troubleshoot the issue.
Can you sum it up?
Weird. Honestly, let me reread it.
Oh, I'm going to read it. I'm trying to migrate a latency-sensitive app to Kubernetes. We are using Kubernetes 1.98 or 198 installed with COPS, but percentile 95 response time increases a lot. As I found some known bugs, like CPU limits, I wanted to know if there was something else known, or how to help to further debug this. Right now it's on dedicated servers, the deployments and everything are done, but when trying to migrate, there's a performance impact on the percentile 95 response time for some critical endpoints. It is 100% reproducible, and he links to an issue. The configuration is the same, and then I saw this bug and links to an issue. It stopped using CPU limits. That helped a lot, but the performance is still about 20% worse. And this is being measured in the application itself. Ruby app, when the request arrives, gets the time, and then again, when it finishes writing, it's using Unicorn to process the request. So this rules out any kubeproxy issues. The pod is 3 containers: the app, an Nginx container, and a metrics container. The app has 1 CPU request, while the Nginx and metrics containers have 10M and 20M respectively. None of them is using much CPU considering their requests. The app is about 20% off the top of the request, same for Nginx and metrics. Then they tried using dedicated hosts using taint and labels, so only one of the pods runs in the these servers. I then checked CPU usage of log. Please chime in if anyone has ideas so far.
Is it does it do I/O like to disk?
It gets a little bit weirder.
Okay.
So here's what's crazy. All this communication is like between the 3 containers in the pod, and flipping it over to host networking equals true improves it.
Are they communicating across localhost?
Yes.
But flipping to host network equals true improves it.
Yes. I know, that's the expression I had.
Could that be a bug with the container runtime itself?
I don't think so.
I mean,
Bug with
it
the
could be.
CNI.
It could be something really weird with the IP tables rules, but I'm having trouble imagining what it would be.
The system was all provisioned with COPS and using COPS default CNI driver, which is, I forget the name of it, but it's the, like, it doesn't do anything crazy.
I mean, if it's communication inside the pod across, and it's actually localhost, so it should be across the loopback device, right?
Yeah, it should be like essentially an in-memory thing.
So it shouldn't be hitting CNI at all. But it could, well, unless it was hitting CNI IP tables rules. So like it shouldn't be if they were using some sort of other CNI.
They're using a KubeNet, which is the default for AWS.
KubeNet?
Which is, it is a bunch of routes, and things like that, because like each host winds up, being allocated its own CEDAR range, and then it going that way.
I'd file a bug about that again. That's kind of an unsatisfying answer, I'm sure, but I don't think that's something we'll be able to debug on the call. That's probably like some heavy duty network debugging tools.
Yeah, it was definitely a head scratcher.
Yeah, that's definitely a unique problem.
It's a fascinating one too. Like that's oh man, time to get out a bag of Doritos and spend an entire evening.
just hammering away at it, yeah. Rata, I don't think we can help you past having you file a bug report and then kind of going through things through GitHub, but I do want to know what the outcome of this is.
Yeah, if you do file an issue, like if you don't mind relinking it back in the chat here so we can like track it.
Yes, please.
And I would tag SIG-Node and SIG networking in that as well to get the right people looking at it. Probably SIG networking's the clearer one there, but just in case SIG-Node as well might be useful.
AWS might be good too, with that being the default for the AWS sort of world.
So one other thing I would try is see if you can reproduce this behavior with like a single node cluster that's not stood up, like, or stood up on like a local VM, or stood up on a different cloud provider, or anything, just to see if it's like something weird about the interaction with AWS as well, because that would narrow it down a lot. Because if it does end up being AWS specific, like that might point to something much clearer than if it's general.
Was there a different CNI used? Did Rada try using a different CNI in that setup to see if it changed anything?
Just KubeNet.
Because I would be curious if it worked or it didn't make a difference, the CNI provider that was being used, because that would kind of rule out some issues that it could be.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Awesome. Rada, hopefully that moves you forward a little bit. And again, if you do file an issue, please link it back here because I think we all want to follow it. Sean asks a couple more questions. First, are there any operators you folks want to see? So this will be a good one. Don't everybody speak up at once.
Well, so I was going to say, I mean, we're starting to see operators for things like databases, things like Vault, things that take a lot of effort to deploy. And I could see doing one for GitLab, right? Things that have multiple components, things that have their own upgrade paths that might be, relatively quick. I think there's a lot that operators provide, and I'd like to see more of this, come of age for a lot more different applications instead of, well, let me go to the Helm charts and see if there's a chart that's super massive that I'm going to have to manage and worry about 18 different, components, right? I prefer the operator model than I do just the, worry about my Helm charts being updated, right? So that's something I'd like to see. I think that for me, yeah, every major project it seems like is working on an operator. I remember CoreOS before being bought, the kind of tectonic piece. I think they were starting to work, especially with HashiCorp on the Vault, and kind of calling them like their app stack, where they were just applications that had operators created for them. So I'd like to see more of it for literally anything. It makes life a lot easier.
I actually want to mirror that a little bit. I almost see operators being, I don't want to say a replacement, but definitely sort of the way Kelsey said we shouldn't be using kubectl to interact with the cluster. I think we should be interacting with operators and not Helm charts. Like,
I would also like to see operators for more of the common components on the cluster. Like, I think it would be really cool if you could define the state of your cluster as like, give me a kubedns, an Nginx ingress controller, and a copy of metric server or whatever, and you declared your Nginx ingress controller with a declarative configuration format instead of having to manually specify flags and configuration variables and stuff. But like that, and I'm not picking on Nginx in general or anything. I haven't actually gone and checked to see if there's a controller for Nginx ingress. But like in general, components like that, I think I'm very much looking forward to controllers for those.
any other thoughts, panel?
Looking forward to operators that are a bit more stable and fleshed out for Prometheus and some of the monitoring and log portions, because it's a big giant kind of a pain, in my opinion, to get everything just right.
Hold on.
Dealing with that right now.
Prometheus operator.
Yeah, I mean we're working on making the Prometheus operator even better. So
I look forward to that significantly.
Same. The docs definitely need to be upgraded.
Yeah. And Sean has one last question, he promises. What in the cloud native space are you folks most interested and excited about? I'll take this.
Okay.
So I have two sides of me. One's just a giant nerd, and the other works for the university as like a research programmer. So I'm really interested in applying all the cloud native stuff to just academia in general. Bob's going to say the same thing. I stole his thunder this time. So that's that's half of me. The other half is just seeing where it goes. I see serverless being a much bigger thing for developers, but I want to see the underlying technology under that and how that evolves.
The big thing that like I'm really really looking forward to is the like multiple different kinds of containerizers being able to be like run side by side. So if you want to have like a sandbox containerizer sitting next to a normal containerizer, so if you have something that does need to run privileged, you can do it that way. Or if you want to, you don't trust something, run it in gvisor, run it in Kata. I think that'll be sweet, especially for multi-tenant clusters.
Actually, you just reminded me of one other thing. So there was news that, what is it? Chick-fil-A runs Kubernetes in every store, and Toyota has Kubernetes in their cars now. And everyone laughs like, oh my God, that is so ridiculous and kind of cool. But something I've been saying for almost a year now is like Kubernetes isn't just going to be for like at scale computing because it's a lot easier to develop for that platform. So I actually see more cloud native things being applied at a smaller scale.
So I'm looking forward to two things. I'm looking forward to kind of similarly what Jeffrey was saying, more things being done through kind of a declarative like Kubernetes style. I really like that. And this may be a little bit boring, but I'm looking forward to seeing what people do with making image building more straightforward for common use cases, right? So like right now, in the up until recently, right, we've mostly just had this general purpose tool in Docker files, which is great as a general purpose tool, and it's fairly simple, excluding some of the rough edges like around copy and add and stuff like that, right? But like, there's common use cases where it's very clunky. And we're starting to see more people experiment around with what we can do around image building. And I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that, so that we have less of this awkward dance around like, here's the build infrastructure for my project, and here's this weird Docker file that just runs all these commands just to hack it into getting a Docker file, as opposed to here's generating a container image using my native build infrastructure for my language.
Any other opinions or thoughts on this, Mario or Ralph?
I have two. One is the cluster API being fully spec'd out. So there's a single like way to deploy things. Because right now it's very dependent on where you are, what you're doing. It would be great to kind of keep the cloud native declarative bit all the way down, so that you're not as hamstrung as to how you're going to deploy your nodes for your cluster. And then the other one that I'm kind of looking forward to is seeing, similar to build, is right now I basically throw things in Jenkins and then push it to a registry and then it comes back, which is a very common pattern. And not having to use Docker and Docker or some of the other ways, but something a little bit more robust would be amazing to see.
Being last here, you guys pretty much covered everything. I think that as time goes on, there are pieces of things where DevOps teams or developers may be doing a lot of extra work. And I think it's interesting to see how all of these tools are going to come together, get adopted, get the resources they need, and then build on top of each other. It's this compounding effect. And then things will become easier. The mundane tasks, the things that, editing YAML specifically, worrying about services or managing things, how many things are running, handling CPUs, things like that. The worries will become less and less as the tools become more fleshed out. Things like operators are a great key example of that. So not much else to say. I'm pretty excited about it. So
That was an awesome question. So Kenzie added on to one of Sean's questions. The layer question, UMOCI and some other tools allow choosing where your layer snapshots happen, so you can make your layers the right size instead of too big to be useful or so small you have a bunch of small, needless stuff. Evesy said they would try and reproduce it. Awesome. Nick has a question, and it's a bit of a general question. How do you guys manage to keep all of your versions of Kubernetes fairly recent? Kubernetes core cluster seems to have fairly regular releases. Then there's lots of related but often required services, such as Prometheus, Vault, etc. I'm sure I could spend forever just upgrading. He also later says that a one operator to rule them all would be a very good idea.
So on the subject of that, I believe, so we recently open sourced a kind of a operator lifecycle manager that is kind of designed to help do that. An operator to keep track of your operators and update your operators. And yeah, I think that kind of thing is the future, because operators make it really easy to deal with and upgrade individual components. So like on the individual component level, keeping your Prometheus up to date should be hypothetically as simple as running your Prometheus operator and making sure the instance of your Prometheus operator is kept up to date. And then, you know, obviously what keeps your Prometheus operator up to date? Another operator, turtles all the way down.
It's going to happen, and you know it's going to happen.
Yep.
But as far as like keeping Kubernetes versions up to date, what are your, do you guys have like an upgrade cycle? How often do you try and update your version of Kubernetes? That's a better question, I think.
I usually upgrade my, I do a lot of beta testing on my clusters. So I run beta pretty often. But on ones that I keep up on my home lab, I tend to go on like 0.1 or 0.2 of the newest one. And I usually use kubeadmin as my upgrade option. So it just keeps going.
We're pretty much the same here at the University of Michigan. We won't go with like, 1.11, but we'll wait for 1.11.1 or 1.11.2.
All right. I have, oh, that's a bad name to try and say. Apeshel? I'm sorry if I butcher it. Question, I'm looking for some insight on best practices for doing deployments with Kubernetes. At the moment, we're trying to use Helm. We've broken up our services into multiple charts, and we have an umbrella chart that pulls in our various service charts as requirements. Some rough spots that we've hit are, what should the workflow for deploying a new version of a single service look like? What should the developer cycle for making a change and deploying it to Kubernetes look like? And how should one effectively manage the Helm configuration that is needed to configure all the charts in the umbrella? Or should we be doing something entirely different for deployments? There were some notes in between there. If you guys don't mind glancing, I was just trying to keep the question a little concise.
Like, I want to attack this one, but I'm a little scared. So let me jump here to this workspace with his questions here. When people say best practices, I mean, a lot of this is arbitrary, right? A lot of this is based on your organization. And he mentioned devs deploying, right? In my organization, devs don't deploy. They push code, and another team handles the deployment, right? So there's a filter there, and we verify the configuration so that the configuration, if there's a change that's needed, it's based on a feature or something that's changed in the code, and we need to know about that so we can deploy it as reliably as possible to the cluster. So that's one difference. Like, there aren't really best practices for this right now. There isn't. If you search best practices Helm, you're probably not going to find anything. His first question, a new version of a single service, creating a new umbrella chart every time we want to upgrade a service. I mean, it sounds like he's adding a lot of unnecessary work. And so my first thing would be keep it simple, keep it stupid simple, while still explicit, right? And so I can't really tell you what your workflow for a new version of a single service would be, but I mean, updating the version, I don't know what his CI/CD is, but updating the version to what the next tag is for an image, maybe, or if there's a new image, or whatever that is, updating your Helm chart version as well. Being verbose and making sure those are kind of in a commit path so that those changes can be followed. The key thing here with Helm or any package manager for Kubernetes and your applications is that not one person should own everything, but the team should have a good understanding of what's currently deployed, what's incubation, what's stable and not stable, et cetera. So making sure to maintain that is very important. What should the developer cycle for making a change and deploying to the Kubernetes? These are, again, very 10,000 foot view questions. For us, developers push code. And we kind of manage the deployments ourselves. And so the code goes through its CI/CD process, and then the image is tagged or whatever and updated. And that's kind of an automated process so that no one has to touch it. And really the only thing that's needed is verification in the form of a PR or something like that. So, and then let's see. Sorry, go ahead and jump into here.
So I want to point out on the subject of CI/CD, GitHub did a really neat presentation last KubeCon about how they deploy on their internal Kubernetes clusters, and I think it's definitely worth watching. The too long didn't watch is basically they have a bunch of configuration files checked in, and it deploys a new copy. Like each PR and developers can deploy a new copy of the service into a test cluster, but also you can, before a PR merges, they deploy canary builds into the actual cluster to see if it works, which I think is a really neat workflow.
I love that.
I think DigitalOcean actually does something similar too.
And then they have all their stuff integrated with the chat platform too, so they can get alerts and they can deal with things, and they have a bot that bugs them if things break. That all goes through their chat too.
Chat ops is the future. Hopefully,
I'm trying to find that. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. I was just going to say I'm trying to find that GitHub presentation from the previous KubeCon, and I'll link that in the channel.
Yeah, it was a keynote, I think.
Okay.
One of the other things I keep in mind is definitely, like, if Helm is working for you, that's great. If Helm is not working for you, definitely don't feel like you have to use Helm. Just use the tool for the job, right? And if you feel Helm is adding unnecessary complication, consider other things. There's a number of other tools for managing your configuration. And take a look at them. There's even tools for just like if you want to keep your configuration just in straight Kubernetes YAML files and then pull in things on top of them. There's a SIG CLI has a project that I can grab the link for that's kind of designed to like layer extra config on top of base YAML files. So if that's easier for you, consider that.
is it called Customize?
It is called Kustomize.
Nick linked to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's customized Cubicorn, Draft, KubePack, KSonnet. There are tons of other tools that are maybe not Helm. Like Helm is like going all the way to 60. Like these other tools kind of supplement the YAML handling and the templating as well, where charts can be really, really like a huge barrier to entry for a lot of teams, and they take a lot of time.
Then everything changes with Helm 3 around the corner too.
Yep. So not only did Nick link Customize, Nick also linked Auto DevOps, which is a very fun feature of GitLab. And I think we helped Apeshel. God, I hope I'm saying that right. So that's it for the chat questions. I'm going to start digging into some of the questions that we found on Discuss and Focal. But if anyone has any other questions, please type them in chat, and we'll get to them right after we answer some of these. So on Discuss, UA Lee asks, hi, is there any documentation or tutorial on how to integrate Kubernetes with Docker Notary?
And I can take this one. So as far as I know, Kubernetes itself does not integrate with Notary. However, the Docker daemon does. You have to configure the Docker daemon on every host with enabling the Docker content trust, which is just like the env variable docker underscore content underscore trust equals 1. And then another one that is Docker content trust server, and that's just the URL to the server itself. Then whenever you go to pull an image, Kubernetes will kick off to Docker. Docker will go and pull the image, and you can say like, must be verified there. Kind of annoying, but is what it is.
Does anybody else have experience kind of doing Notary with a Kubernetes cluster? All right. Maybe that's something we check into a little bit later, but I'm pretty sure Bob's right about there's no direct link, and I don't think there's a project that links the two. Next question, THCDRT asks, from what I understood, kubectl port forward allows to do the same things as kubectl proxy and more. Indeed, kubectl port forward allows TCP traffic, therefore HTTP, while kubectl proxy only allows HTTP. So what is the purpose of kubectl proxy? Why don't we just have a single kubectl port forward command?
Give me a moment and I can go figure that out. Move on to another question and get back to that, I think.
All
unless
right.
anything else is an answer.
I'm holding you to it. So the next question would be from CRG. I'm really struggling with all these YAML files. Format spacing, what is really needed, what should be in them, what is better to put in them, like more descriptive labels, etc. Every time I try to stray from a very generic sample, stuff goes wonky. I really need a good resource on the pieces and parts and proper layout of deployment files in Kubernetes. I have lots of samples, but I would love to see something that explains why each piece is there, with spacing. I keep having issues with that. If you guys don't mind, I'll take one for once. So yeah, it can be very frustrating, and it is very complicated the more and the deeper you dive. A good IDE with the right plugins does make this easier. I personally use VS Code. VS Code has plugins for Kubernetes, and it will actually lint the YAML for you and make sure things are all right. The other big thing is there are a lot of documentation. There's a lot of documentation just on the API, and the API has everything you need to really know what goes where. It's just diving down a rabbit hole of, okay, there's this object, not just a single variable. What does that object have? Da 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 da. But the IDE will help kind of bring what you want plus what is actually there and merge them together. Any other opinions on that one?
You can also quickly use, like, if you're working at the command line, like kubectl explain on a specific object, and that'll tell you like every field that that specific thing can do.
If you can read Go code, it's an asterisk. So you can get the same information out of the Swagger documentation. I find the Swagger documentation to be a pain in the butt to read. But if you can read the Go code, the types.go file for each of the APIs is actually like decently well documented. And I find it to sometimes be an easier format to read than the Swagger documentation. That's possibly just because my eyes are used to Go. But if you are already a Go developer or have a passing familiarity, I think the commenting in the types.go files can be very useful.
So Solly, do you have the answer for THC DRT yet, or should I move on?
I do, actually. So they actually, this is what I actually thought in the first place, but I hadn't looked at these commands in a while, so I wanted to confirm. They actually serve slightly different purposes. So kubectl proxy is to proxy traffic to the API server in general. So you can use it to proxy to particular services using like the service/proxy subresource, but you can also just use it to proxy, set up like a proxy to the API server. Whereas kubectl port forward is to port forward to particular pods. And so if you're running your API server in a pod, then this starts to get a little bit wibbly wobbly. And you can do the same tasks with both, but they actually serve slightly different purposes in the generic case. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I've seen running the like kubectl proxy as a sidecar for another pod, where you don't necessarily want to like expose the token or something like that to that possible thing, and then it can just hit essentially localhost and query it, and everything else is essentially the security and auth and authorization is delegated to the other container in the pod.
Yeah. So kubectl proxy, and it's also kind of useful as a developer if you want to play around with the Kubernetes API and you're writing an application. I kind of use kubectl get --raw is a similar like single command variant of this. But both of them, what they effectively do is they take care of stuff like reading the kubeconfig file and passing the auth parameters and all that jazz, right? And so you just have to deal with, when you're playing around, you just have to deal with passing the right path. And so as a developer of an application that's working with Kube, or as a developer itself, you can play around with the actual JSON responses and paths.
Okay. Like I said before, if you still have any questions, please dump them into the chat. We still have a few minutes to go. Moving on to another question from Jebin J. Is it possible to add custom IP tables NAT rules in Kubernetes?
I'm okay. So I don't know the answer, but I'm gonna say don't do that. And the other part I'm gonna give here is you can do anything you want because it's IP tables, so you could inject rules if you wanted to. However, again, please don't do that. Very much think about what you're trying to achieve and go from there and see if there's something native to do what you want to do that's maybe outside of your cluster or provided from your provider that you're using, AWS, etc. I would be interested into like what this person's trying to achieve, and that would be a really great thread on Discourse. So
That's
that's
actually
my
where it
2
came
cents.
from.
Just to add on a little bit to that, again, echo be very careful with what you're doing. But it is technically possible as long as you don't interfere with the Kubernetes IP tables chains. So Kubernetes will manage its own chains, and if you make changes, those will get blown away. And it also insists on certain jumps being first in certain changes. So don't necessarily, if you put a rule as the first in a certain chain, some of the default chains, don't be surprised if Kubernetes, when it refreshes, moves one of its rules up above your rule. But other than that, it is technically possible, but you should be very careful about what you're doing.
I've seen probably 2 use cases for this. One is compliance, where if, for some reason you have to explicitly define you're blocking something, but you're not going to be managing that through Kubernetes and stuff. You're going to be managing that on the hosts, like the FSMA CY stuff that we dealt with. And then the only other thing that I could, again, like remotely think of is if you somehow need to add a VPN route or something like that.
If you're writing your own CNI plugin, that's a third option.
Yeah.
Okay. Kelsey linked an awesome project called Forge.sh. It's built by the same people that made Telepresence. Evesy asks, on the off chance anybody has the inside scoop, any idea if GKE is going to switch to core DNS in 1.11? My thought process is Google Next is next week, so maybe we find out then.
Yeah, you might be able to ask some of the Google folks. A lot of the people that have the inside scoop or work on GKE actually are also Kubernetes developers. No guarantee that they're going to have an answer that they can tell you, but
Yeah.
I was going to ask, actually, is there a GKE specific meeting place in the Kubernetes Slack at all?
Yes, there's a hashtag GKE channel.
Okay.
So pop over there. Beat you to it. All right. We've got time for a couple more from the list. Johnson asks, is there a best practice on how to expose MySQL or Postgres to external users? Not for debugging, but for permanent clients. Just following the stateful set tutorial and now a bit lost on what to do next. From what I can, based on that, I'm thinking he needs to set up some sort of a service, whether it's load balancer, like node port,
Right.
depending on his setup.
Node port, I was going to say.
So by setting up a node port or a load balancer, if your cluster supports that, that is how you would expose your pods to the outside. Yeah.
I think we actually had a similar question on the last US Office Hours with a stateful set, and how do you create a service to target a specific instance of a stateful set? I was looking up the one label name.
I was having flashbacks to that.
Seems to be a common problem.
All right, and we have actually hit the last question that we have, and I think we'll wrap it up. So Mike Williamson asks, I have a database running on MongoDB's Atlas service. I'm getting my app running in Kubernetes. Am I correct in thinking that I would need to do something like this? And I will post it because it's kind of a small little block. So creating a service, and then I would expect the NS lookup for MongoDB-Atlas to work if I exec into one of my pods. Is that right, or am I more confused than I think?
That's right. It's just a CNAME entry.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to fill in the external name, presumably, but yeah, as long as you have that filled in, I believe it should work.
Yep, it creates a local, like an Etsy hosts entry is how I believe external name works.
Chat, if we don't have any more questions, panelists, do we have any announcements or anything cool?
Did the image thing get fixed?
I believe the image thing is getting fixed. I don't think it is fully fixed. And the image thing is there were several people weren't able to pull 1.11.1 images, and apparently they hadn't pushed them all up. Or something.
We have one more very important question.
Do you want me to read it?
I would love for you to read it.
Kenzie asks, when will Kubernetes brew my coffee? And I think I have an answer to that. You see, we were talking about Kubernetes going big and also going small. So the minute that Kubernetes is actually installed in an IoT device that will brew coffee, that is your answer. And I'm also going to guess 2020.
I have a follow-up to that. I would be very pleased if someone submitted an April Fool's Day PR to make Kubernetes respond to the hypertext coffee protocol.
Calendar.google.com,
With
April 2019.
The only
With
problem
appropriate responses for I'm a teapot.
Right.
I think we need kind coffee and, API version V1 Alpha 1.
Also, I want an operator for this as well. I don't want to worry about deploying it with Helm too much and upgrades, so it needs to auto-update.
Sean did say there's an operator for that.
I have a spare Pi and
All right.
I can probably wire it to cook my coffee maker.
We could do this. All it requires is some electrical engineering and a little bit of custom Kubernetes CRD development.
Dude, KubeCon hackathon. I'm sure it can be cranked out pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure. So Jeff, I can dump a few kind of headlines, some news / some important things happening in articles and whatnot if we want to kind of use up a few minutes here.
Sure.
Good.
No, I mean
Cool.
we've got 5 minutes, so.
Yeah, I mean, here's some stuff we can discuss. There's a lot of great headlines from Cube Weekly, especially around the 111 release interview, which is on the Kubernetes podcast, which I highly suggest anyone listening in right now. If you're listening to this, you'll love the Kubernetes podcast. It's nice and short, about a half an hour. And the latest one is actually with Joe Beta on the history of Kubernetes. And so one of the previous ones I listened to that I love was with Josh Burkus and Tim Pepper on the releasing Kubernetes and what that looks like. So really interesting stuff there. There's a lot of articles that are coming out about more CI/CD with tools like Jenkins-X, which is very similar to what GitLab has been doing, handling Kubernetes for you. So doing things like when you go to run your tests, it will deploy a cluster for you in the cloud environment of your choice. Just to run your test and then tear it down for you automatically. So there's a lot of cool things happening there, etc. So another thing, Netlify, which is the service that is now used for Kubernetes documentation building in a static way, is actually using Kubernetes, and they just published an article about their CD process with that and everything they've learned. I'm linking that now in the Office Hours channel. So some really cool stuff from some companies that we know. And I think you said this earlier, Jeff, that Helm is now in its own namespace on GitHub. I'm not sure if there's going to be an official announcement or if there has been one. I haven't seen a blog post or anything like that. That'd be something to keep an eye out for. That is not the right tab, but also Netflix is launching a comedy-focused radio show. So let's see. Also, Microsoft has a new show called the Open Source Show on YouTube, and one of the episodes here is with Justin Garrison and Bridget Cromhout. I can't say her last name, but they did the CNI book, and this is talking about everything with getting started with cloud native infrastructure to hosting and finding community events to logging metrics and error tracking, all of these kind of everything around the community and what's going on in cloud native. Which is really cool. And I think I can link to that here, hopefully. So other than that, those are some of the key things. Like I said, I highly recommend the Kubernetes podcast. There's a lot of cool stuff there. And
Mario just muted himself.
okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you muted yourself.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, computer had a little blip there. That is about it. Anyone have anything else or any
announcements?
Comments on any comments or announcements on things I talked about?
I think that's a good stopping point. Leave everyone with something to look up. So thanks to the following companies for supporting the community with developer volunteers: Giant Swarm, Heptio, Liquaweb, Red Hat, Weaveworks, University of Michigan, and Packet.net, and the CNCF. Thanks to Google for sponsoring the shirts. Soon we will be holding raffles for the audience with shirts, Kubernetes spinners, all sorts of cool stuff, so it pays to come back. The raffle thing will happen afterwards because I have to stream on my Windows box and my laptop has the little Python script, so that'll come afterwards. Whoever wins will get a coupon code from George, and that'll be good for a t-shirt from the CNCF store. Lastly, feel free to hang out and hashtag office hours afterwards. If there are any other if the other channels are too busy or you're looking for a friendly home, you're more than welcome to pull up a chair and hang out with us. And with that, thanks panelists, and thank you everybody watching.